This is David Weiss, professor at New Jersey City University. I am talking with Justin Lanci today as part of the kickoff series of interviews that we'll be doing around the world to discuss global business and global affairs. I'm a professor in the business management department at New Jersey City University. I'm also the director of the entrepreneurship program, and I'm also an assistant professor that teaches global business and undergraduate and graduate programs. So today we have Justin Lanci from Italy, from a town called Morbegno, which is about 1 hour from Milan, sitting on the edge of Lake Como. Today's discussion is about Italy and what has been happening there on an economic level, given the pandemic flu that we are now facing. And we're going to get some insight from Justin, who is going through this, living it, and his story and background is connected back to the United States. So, Justin, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm doing well, David. Thank you.
So, Justin, why don't you give a little bit of background on your story, on how you even got to this town, and where you're originally from?
Sure. So I was born in New York, but grew up mostly in New Jersey. And I began working for you as a paralegal when I was 17 years old. From there, I went on to commercial real estate investment, working for a niche equity investment firm in New York. I lived in New York City for 10 years, where I went to college and then law school. While I was in law school, I took an interest in international law, and I also, for whatever reason, just became completely enamored with Italian language and Italian culture. I began traveling to Italy whenever I could, and finally, when I graduated from law school, I moved here. And as you know, my parents, brother, and extended family are still in the U.S., and I was doing this thing where I'd spend most of the year in Italy, but then come back to New York for a few months out of the year. At the end of last year, I decided to invert that pattern, so spend more time in New York, but come back to Italy for a few months. And on February 20th, I boarded a plane from New York to Milan Malpensa, thinking that I would be here in Italy for a month. And from there, things kind of went sideways. Luckily, I still have an apartment here and lots of resources to fall back on. But now I'm in my apartment here in Lombardy in lockdown, waiting this whole thing out.
That's amazing. I know you've also participated in what we had at New Jersey City University, which is part of the Institute for Dispute Resolution. We host and incubate several programs and projects. One of them is called the Connecting Bridges and Borders program, which promotes international business and trade to support foreign direct investment. You were actually a participant in that in Budapest last fall. So part of what I want to ask you is, given your Wall Street experience, maybe you can just give a little bit of understanding of what you did. Also, if I'm not mistaken, you went to New York Law School, is that correct? So we run a Connecting Bridges and Borders program, which is part of this series to promote international trade and foreign direct investment. It is a platform underneath our Institute for Dispute Resolution, where we incubate programs that have an international aspect to it. So given your experience both going to law school, I believe you went to New York Law School, is that correct?
That's correct.
And also your experience on Wall Street, maybe you can just give a quick understanding of what you did on Wall Street within the capital market space, because I think our listeners would be interested in your depth of experience, which I believe was a number of years. And then we'll sort of talk about that in perspective to what is happening in Italy in terms of real time right now and what you're observing.
Okay, sure. So my work, to be clear, was not, I did not work physically on Wall Street. I worked for a firm that did equity investment in commercial real estate, and I was responsible for the acquisition process within that company and also for managing their investment funds. So I was involved in the day-to-day management of the investment funds and also on the back end with their clients, and then on the back end, with that firm's client finalizing their investments into those funds.
And a lot of that had to do with creating liquidity, right? With tax credits, I believe. Is that what you were working on?
That's correct. Specifically, they dealt with that's correct. Specifically, we dealt with the affordable housing tax credit. So the types of properties that they were investing in were affordable housing projects. And the way that works is you would have a developer who ordinarily wouldn't do that kind of deal because they just don't have the bottom line there. But with the tax credit, which is allocated by the state housing agency, they can use that tax credit and exchange it with an investor in exchange for equity in their project.
So
that tax credit then gets syndicated. That tax credit then gets syndicated by the investor to other companies that can then use it to reduce their capital gains.
So then you went on to law school, and following law school, can you give us an idea of what you've been doing in Italy? Because I think you've been working on some interesting projects over the last couple of years, back and forth between Italy and the United States. I think more on the creative consulting side, as well as real estate. Maybe you can give just some understanding and concept behind your work there in Italy.
Sure. Well, when I first got to Italy, to be frank, I didn't have to do a lot of anything because I had been working in real estate investment, and frankly, my cost of living here wasn't high, and I just took some time and recovered from law school. But then eventually what I began doing was developing a portfolio of intellectual properties, which mostly have to do with topics like law, business, and culture. And that company it still exists, and the properties within that portfolio, I'm in the process of making them available right now.
What is the name of that company, so that in case people are interested in what you do there to promote?
Sure. Well, that company. That company is my holding company. It's called Angsanum Holdings. The name comes from the Latin name of the town that my grandparents came from in Italy. However, there's no client base inside on that. If folks want to get in contact with me or want to be in touch with what I'm doing right now, I have a company that we're launching this month called Verone Consulting, which facilitates business planning and development with a special focus on Europe and especially Italy.
And do you have a website in case somebody is interested in getting in touch with you or some sort of...
Absolutely. If anyone that wants to... Absolutely. Our website is www.veronais.com.
And what now sort of looking at obviously what the plans were before the world has sort of now adapted to this new reality, given the coronavirus and the pandemic, and I know we're all focused on our safety and health, and I do want to do a deeper dive into what you're experiencing in Italy on that level. But before we go there, for our listeners, what are, when we talk about business, what were you doing to sort of get that business started in Italy before sort of the changes? And then my second follow-up question would be, what are you doing now to sort of adapt to this new world that we're in order to make the business continue and function? And the third would be, what challenges are you facing?
Sure. Well, to respond to the first question, I'd say that, hang on, I'm not going to number these. Sure. So what I would say is, before this all happened, you always have to look for the silver lining. And in this situation, that I was in the launch phase of business. So in a certain respect, I have a lot of time now to do the kind of administrative stuff that goes into starting a business without having a lot of distractions. There's also no excuse to not be working on things because in lockdown in my home. So if there was ever better motivation for a person to bunker down and get to work, I haven't seen it.
And as far as in the new reality, are you finding any sort of stimulus programs, help, support from the Italian government for entrepreneurs like you in order to not only continue to function, but actually help start or restart the economic conditions that you're facing in Italy on a personal level, vis-a-vis your company?
Yeah, so there's a lot of talk about stimulus, although nothing concrete in terms of cash to people has come through Parliament yet. But most of what they're talking about are things like suspending mortgage payments and suspending utility payments to help people get through this. In my particular case, because I transferred my residence back to New York at the end of last year, this company is a U.S. company, and so I don't think that I'm going to have any access to that kind of stimulus or to any programs that come down the pike.
Well, that's interesting. So it's something that perhaps can be highlighted from that comment is how you and many, I'm sure, other U.S.-based companies that are operating within Italy or within the EU perhaps are not things that the United States stimulus program, which currently is under discussion of over $1 trillion, may or may not be including small businesses or what we call SMEs, like yourself, that are located in countries like Italy, but have a U.S.-based connection and nexus, which again would be part of the economic package or should be considered. Would you agree?
I would agree. I'm skeptical about what we're actually going to see in terms of stimulus. I'm not sure if you saw that this morning, the ECB just announced that they freed up $112 billion to maintain credit flow to European banks. And shortly after that, and this is a real headline, I read on the BBC that the ECB was having a conference with country leaders, with world leaders in Europe, to talk about rescheduling the cricket season. So on a certain level, I've given over the skepticism about how seriously it's being taken and what their actual capacity is to deal with this.
And if you had, some insight from other fellow entrepreneurs like yourself, are you communicating online with other colleagues in Italy that are sort of in similar startup ecosystems that are doing maybe different things, but the common interests are that you're all trying to, get your businesses continuing to flow and to go through that startup phase that you were doing before the pandemic, but now you're doing it still. What are some of the challenges that you're hearing from some of your colleagues or peers in terms of their obstacles that they're facing that may be similar to yours or maybe not?
Right, so here I think I am sort of in a category by myself, but other SMEs that are here, a lot of the complaints that I've been hearing are just a lot of the SMEs that are here, the complaints that I've been hearing is the unequal treatment between that kind of small business entity and larger corporations. Here, especially because of how the Italian tax system is designed, a person who is self-employed or maybe has one employee or two, they may not choose the kind of corporate the kind of corporate entity structure that would be required to access these programs. So you have a lot of people that are attorneys and accountants, and they operate simply as sole proprietorships, and even if they have someone that works for them, that person is classified as an independent contractor. So really the only kind of stimulus help that they can look for is the kind that's being extended to individuals. When it comes to corporate stimulus, I don't think that they can really hope for too much. And really, I think the tact that at least the Italian government is going to take is going to be a lot more in terms of lowering expenses and suspending payments on things that are expenses for business owners, rather than giving them cash to help them float through this crisis.
Well, you raise a really interesting point then, because then it gets to the issue of liquidity. And then what is your opinion about the ECB's role in providing some cash injection into startups, entrepreneurship platforms that are similar to yours, along the lines of what you're facing in Italy yourself as an SME or a startup?
Well, I think it's really the European Commission or some kind of European subcommittee that would decide what kind of programs they're going to form to help small businesses. And then, of course, the cash would come from the ECB. But at the end of the day, I don't think they're the final arbiters of where that cash goes. Also,
have you heard anything from Brussels with respect to that, or is it really just all hands on deck right now to fight the virus, and they're not looking at sort of a cash injection, if you will, to restart the economy?
Well, I can only say anecdotally that the news cycle has been dominated by the virus, and the economy doesn't really seem to be like something that the press is particularly concerned about here. Everyday people care about it, and everyday people and business owners are hurting. But whatever their concern is about business, and this is just sort of a value judgment on the part of the Italian people. However badly the economy hurts, it's more important to protect your elders, and that's just something that's evident in everything that you see and everything that you read here.
Well, now that we're talking about more, a little bit about protecting the elders, tell us a little bit what you are seeing play out since you got back on the ground there in Italy, as the pandemic had just about began, as you were describing when you flew in about a month or two ago. And what are you seeing in terms of the significant changes right in your community, as well as within the greater sort of northern area of Italy? And also maybe you can clarify for us, since you're there, because we only get, obviously small segments of what is happening, but you're there, so maybe you can give us a real understanding of what Italy is going through, and what are the challenges you are facing right now, because what we're hearing is Italy is being used more as a case study of what not to do in terms of managing this virus. And we're interested, obviously, in not only what is happening in managing the virus, but understanding really from someone that's living through it in Italy, what measures are being taken, where things are at, and then what corrections or modifications or improvements need to be made.
Sure. Well, what I can tell you is that when I landed at Malpensa, which is the principal intercontinental airport for the city of Milan, when I landed on February 20th, what they were doing was a spot check on the health of incoming passengers. And what they did, and forgive me, I'm not a doctor, they had some kind of laser gun that they were pointing at our foreheads to read our temperature. And then they would do that thing where they shine a flashlight in your eyes to see how quickly your pupils respond to it. And that was really it. And I didn't really ask a lot of questions because I'd just gotten off an international flight. I just wanted to get my bag and go home. But they stopped us for 2 seconds. They did that quick little check, and that was it. What I can say, though, is I don't think that step should be undervalued in terms of responsiveness. Remember, this was on February 20th. This was before anybody in Italy has died of the virus. And also, just anecdotally, I fly back and forth between New York and Milan a lot. And there have literally been times that they didn't check my passport. But as soon as there's a threat to public health, then they instituted real checks. And as I understand it, those checks for incoming passengers to Italy ramped up very quickly, whereas going the other way back to the United States, there are people that got back from northern Italy, I think last week, into the United States without getting checked at all.
And what are you seeing, if I may ask, when we talk about supply chain, what are you seeing on the ground there in terms of now this what we call the whole border lockdown is not necessarily, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a difference between a border lockdown and a border check for the Shenzhen, or help me pronounce it correctly, Justin, but the
Shenzhen area, yeah.
Yeah, the Shenzhen area. So how is that affecting supply chain, even when it comes to the basic necessities of pharmaceutical drugs, equipment for gloves, masks, ventilators? What are you seeing, or what are you hearing about this? And or even food?
Yeah, let me start with everyday necessities, because I think I might be able to speak better to that. And what I can say is that I saw that I fortunately I had the good sense to go stock up on food before there was real pandemonium in the supermarkets. But at a certain point, I did decide to go to the supermarket to top off my supplies. And when I went there was just complete chaos. They weren't letting people into the supermarket without a shopping cart. It was one of the types of shopping carts where you had to put a coin in to get the cart out. And outside the supermarket, I saw there was a woman who didn't have any coins on her. And what she was trying to do was stop someone coming out of the supermarket with a shopping cart and trade them 10 euros in exchange for the cart with a €1 coin in it. She couldn't get anybody to do it because nobody wanted to make physical contact with her money. And that's the kind of thing that I thought really kind of made me start thinking that this is a serious issue. In terms of keeping the supermarket stocked, I think they're doing a very good job, and I think that people that work in logistics and distribution here are doing a truly heroic job. That said, a person who strategizes and thinks about the future might start worrying, because as you pointed out, the borders are not porous anymore, and there's no guarantee that you have a flood of goods coming in. And that involves especially things that people might not deem to be necessary, like heavy industrial goods. So, for example, a transformer that might be used for the electrical supply chain. So this is, of course, right now a hypothetical, but let's say that there's transformer fire in a local electrical distribution chain. What do they do if they go to the depot and there are no new transformers there to replace them?
That's a scary proposition. What are there any sort of community-based or here we would call it more state-based? I don't know how Italy is set up in terms of its vicinage.
The analogous political unit would be the region here.
Okay, so what is the region? Is it becoming very localized, where the region is trying to engage the local community in terms of how it will fill these supply chain gaps in the event of a further disruption in the supply chain for, any sort of resources necessary to operate the community?
No, I think the official word from the government here is the same that it is from governments all around the world, which is don't hoard, don't worry, don't stockpile. We'll take care of everything. And I think, it's good that they're trying to avoid panic, but by the same token, they might benefit by getting a little bit of community involvement in this kind of problem solving.
And in terms of your local, actual, everyday life, we were seeing on the news, because we're about to face this, where we're all on, here in the United States, it's at least in some cities, it's mandatory stay in your home. In other cities or other communities around the country, still in the United States, because we're they say a week or 2 weeks away from the Italian Europe experience. You've been on actual mandated lockdown, is that correct?
That's correct. And I would say that the better, this has been called a quarantine, it's been called a lockdown. I think that really the best terminology for this to describe what it is it's a general curfew. You have to be inside of your house unless you have one of a handful of justifications to be out of it. which would be a thing, and which are reasonable things, so things like going to the supermarket or filling a prescription. But if you're going to do those things, you have to fill out an affidavit and keep it on you and have identification on you. And if a police officer stops you outside the house and you don't have one of these predetermined justifications for being outside of the house, the consequences can range from being told to just being sent home to being arrested. And I think, they're kind of taking a common sense approach to that. An older woman who's out taking a stroll is going to get different treatment than a young guy with a backpack and a DSLR camera.
And are you seeing, after being, so many weeks on this, sort of quarantine process, are you seeing people get a little, we'll say, house feverish, where they're getting over this?
Yeah,
we'll call it the hiatus of the vacation, which we're starting to see here, where people are after 10 days or so. The concern is, how do you keep a community functioning? How do you keep some level of quality of life while at the same time mitigating the pandemic and trying to restart or re-jump some sort of assemblage of economic activity?
But, one thing I can say after 6 years of living here is never to underestimate the resiliency of people. I mean, they're really great, and I don't think that you need a public information campaign to get people to do things like check in on their elderly neighbors or make sure that their elderly neighbors have supplies. In terms of this being stir crazy from being locked inside your house, I would say there are very funny things going around on the internet about how people are safe from the virus, but now they suffer from obesity. Because they're just in their houses all day and there's not much to do, so they're cooking and baking and doing that kind of thing. There's also, actually, I shouldn't make too much light of that because there is potential for real tragedy there too. Imagine a person who was just about to get out of an abusive relationship, and then the next day there's general quarantine.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting observation. These are the little things that are not necessarily thought of immediately, but are certainly significant on what I'll call our normal daily lives. What about? Go ahead.
Yeah, and I don't think that the Prime Minister or the Cabinet of Ministers or the Parliament were really thinking through those kinds of things. And this is not unique to Italy. I think you're seeing this all over the world. At the political level, I think politicians are much more concerned about political fallout than they are about best practices and getting the best health results for the population.
Now, one of the things we're seeing today in the United States, at least in the what we'll say the New York tri-state area, is a fleeing of those with more cash flow out to places like the Hamptons. So all of a sudden today, in terms of the shifting of economic opportunities, we'll say, where big homes in the Hamptons are usually rented in the summer. Now, those with the opportunity to do so, they're actually leaving New York City proper and going out to homes much further away from urban environments. Are you starting to see that through like Milan and other cities where there are people who can afford to or are starting to migrate to areas that are maybe a little bit less populated, such as where you live? And if so, how is that going to be a burden on the system where you are now versus the current population that exists there today?
I can't answer anecdotally to that because I haven't actually seen it. But what I can tell you is that something that was a part of the curfew decree was a prohibition on going out to vacation homes. That's actually specifically in the decree, saying that if you own a second home, you can't. Going from your first home to your second home is not a valid excuse for violating the curfew.
And the last question we'll ask before we sort of wrap up, and I appreciate your time today, Justin, and is what are you seeing in terms of younger people getting sick because obviously it's been very focused on the elderly with compromised immune systems. It's been focused on those that may have generally compromised immune systems. But now we're also hearing reports that people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, and even 50s are winding up with the virus. Given the fact that you were there, are you seeing a difference in what you're hearing from the media or from your personal experience of younger people who are without these sort of categorized conditions falling more seriously ill?
What I'm seeing is a lot of discussion about the virus being spread among first responders and people that work in the hospital environment, who are younger workers. When it comes to young people in general, what I saw personally, I don't know of any young person I don't personally know any young person that's sick, but what I saw was at the beginning of this crisis, younger people were not taking it very seriously, and when they closed the schools, but before they put the curfew in place, younger people were just treating it like, well, now every night is Saturday night, so they would go into the town center and go to bars there and hang out. Now that it's gotten to the point where you turn on the nightly news and the number of people that have died is in the thousands, and they're listing out the various celebrities who have caught the virus. Now younger people are taking it seriously, and I see them engaging in social distancing and very lovingly trying to stay away from older people in the community.
Well, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak from Italy today and to give us a little bit of insight from what I say will be an American living in Italy. And I really appreciate your time today to inform us and to give us a little bit more insight, unfiltered, as to what your experiences are and what you're seeing there on the ground. And I wish you and your loved ones safety during this really challenging period for humanity. And our thoughts and prayers go out to you.
David, thank you very much for having me on. It was my pleasure, and my thoughts and prayers are with you and yours as well.
Take care.